How is artificial intelligence going to take over? I'm Mike Smith, and welcome to the Lowdown. Welcome to Lowdown, and today joining me, Sam Rines. Sam, welcome to the show. We're going to talk about a big subject everybody's discussing. It's all over the news: artificial intelligence and AI. I mean, here recently we just heard of ChatGPT-3, then turned into ChatGPT-4, and it went from 0 to 100 million users within 5 weeks. I think previously TikTok went from 0 to 100 million in 9 months. But let's talk about artificial intelligence, and what are your thoughts right now as far as all the hype and all the buzz? You know, is it going to take over, or is it not?
Well, I don't think it's going to take over.
Exactly.
It's really a question in my mind of how is it going to enhance? And that's really the approach I think you have to take from the perspective, at least as an economist, as a strategist for markets. You really have to look at what do you think it's going to do in terms of the ability to enhance not only our lives, but our ability to work more efficiently and our ability to be more creative. Because I really think at the end of the day, what artificial intelligence is really good at is answering questions, not asking them.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what we've seen so far, right? I mean, I think the first version came out, you could ask it some questions, but it had limitations. Very quickly, GPT-4 came out, right? So these are terms that have been thrown out there. Now we've heard of Bard, which is Google's, and we have other versions. So it seems that this thing is coming pretty quickly, and what it couldn't do, the limitations, now those limitations are basically being surpassed. So it seems to be moving at a pretty good speed.
Yeah, except is it useful yet is really the question. And one of the things that I've tried to do is use it to make myself more efficient, right?
Okay.
You know, most of what I do is doing research for financial market participants and attempting to come up with interesting ideas on what's going on, how it's going, which requires an incredible amount of reading, right? It requires coming up with at least some sort of angle that no one else or very few are looking at. And what I've found is that it is not that productivity enhancing yet.
Okay.
You can see the potential, right? You can ask it, you know, hey, go back and read these FOMC minutes that are hundreds of pages long and incredibly boring and give me some feedback on them. And what you find is half the time it's making stuff up and the other half of the time it's skipping all the stuff you actually wanted to know from those minutes. So while it does have an incredible amount of potential out there, it's a lot like looking at it as the internet in, call it, the mid-90s.
Okay.
And attempting to figure out what it will do in 25 years, right? I don't think anyone really would have predicted exactly how pervasive the internet would be right now.
Absolutely. Well, there was many that came out and said the internet's really is going to go away, right? Many thought the internet was going to displace jobs, but we know it created more jobs, right? So a lot of those theories out there, and I think truly heard Mo Godot in his book called Scary Smart. He basically said, AI, artificial intelligence, it's here, but no one truly really knows where it's heading, right? I mean, it's very unknown, but it is here, and so we got a lot of things to do. You're right. I mean, I've used it for kind of research, and it can write letters, so you can see where it can increase my productivity pretty greatly on some things. But like you said, maybe some complex research tasks, those things aren't really there. But is that something that's coming, in 2 weeks from now or a month from now? Possibly.
Who knows? That's kind of the interesting part about AI right now. Is we know that there's an incredible amount of potential, right? We know that, hopefully it will be able to do an incredible number of tasks that particularly alleviate the pain points for, call it research, for creativity related industries. But at the moment, it's simply not there yet. And I think it's really a question of how quickly can we get it there, and what will the outcome of that be, right? Will it displace a significant number of jobs, or will it just radically enhance the productivity of those jobs? And I think that's really something to consider, because I don't think it's something that's going to devastate the U.S. jobs market in any way whatsoever over 2 or 3 years. Right?
Well, that's a good news, because I think many, again, this is something that's come quick. So everybody's out there trying to decipher what this means. You got a lot of using scare tactics, right, and telling you jobs are going to go away. But, we're on the precipice of either a hard landing or soft landing. I talked about that last week on my podcast. And so we'll see where we go. But let's talk about after the recession, getting into the next, economic cycle, displacement of jobs and the rehiring. Do we see maybe companies rehire artificial intelligence and maybe not hire as many workers into the workforce? Is that a possibility, or is that something you think could happen?
Let's see. After a harder soft landing in the next cycle, it's somewhat of a tough question, because you don't know what the sectors are that are going to be most affected in a harder soft landing.
Yeah.
And what I would say right now, particularly in the U.S., is it's really difficult to find leisure and hospitality workers. That's really where the labor shortage is, and AI is not going to have a significant effect on that market.
Our server at lunch is not going to be replaced by AI.
Correct.
Now, we may be able to order, but you're still going to have the human element.
You're still going to have that human element, and AI is not going to clean a hotel room or make a hotel bed, at least yet, until you get a robot that is capable of doing that. It's just not going to happen. So there's somewhat of I think a disconnect between who gets laid off in that sort of recession, how much labor hoarding you actually have during that, because you've had such a shock to the system previously, and employers really haven't adopted AI in a meaningful way yet. So I don't know that they've experimented with it enough to know who they can not rehire and who they should rehire. So I would say the next cycle is probably not going to be the one that's most affected by AI. It's after you've had a significant adoption of it.
Interesting.
That's really when AI becomes, call it, a transforming force within the labor market.
It's like it's too new, basically, to understand maybe where that's going to be in the next cycle. But
it's far too soon.
Okay.
Particularly for businesses, right? Businesses coming out of a recession are mostly trying to chase dollars and really get that growth engine going again, and that takes bodies a lot of times.
Well, I think you just relieved everybody. You know why? Because you said probably the next 2 or 3 years. That's not what you're hearing from people. You're hearing this is going to displace and replace. And of course, that's back to the scare tactics, which we always hear. But I mean, that's a pretty big relief that, hey, it may not be this cycle. And I agree with you. Right now, as a owner of a financial firm, we don't know how we're going to integrate that. We're looking into it. We plan to hopefully use that to enhance every aspect of what we do for our clients, but none of us know exactly how yet. That's probably coming, like you said, in the next 2 to 3 years.
Oh, yeah. And to be fair, I'm desperately trying to use it to alleviate the pain points in my job. And that's, you simply don't have you simply do not have it.
So you've seen some of those limitations, right?
Oh, yeah. It's completely made up FOMC meetings several times for me, which has been fun to try to parse through. So in a way, it's actually made, I wouldn't say my job more difficult, but it has definitely made it more entertaining at points.
Well, let me ask you this. So maybe not so much as, economic cycles, but what sectors do you actually think will start adapting this and, utilizing it better and then maybe what sectors do you see probably not able to really adapt that well?
So the creative, I really think AI is going to be incredibly helpful for creatives and researchers. By alleviating a lot of the pain points there. I think that's really where you're going to see the first real wave of productivity enhancement, not necessarily the hurt. I think the hurt really comes to, call it the paralegal type, and the lower level research side of businesses. When it comes to anything that's on the creative, more taking the research and transforming it into a creative output or an output that is being presented to a client, that is going to be productivity enhanced.
Okay. So do you think, is there any particular sector you think in mind right now that might actually see a quicker adoption of it than maybe another? Like medical,
I mean,
legal. I know you mentioned that.
to a certain degree, medical has already really adopted it at a pretty rapid pace, particularly when it comes to reading X-rays and that type of thing, cancer screenings, etc. One of the major issues on who's going to adopt it first is I think there is a bit of hesitancy to really want to admit that you're the first one that's really diving into this, because you're potentially raising a red flag to your client at this point, because it's not a perfect technology. What am I paying for is on the other front, right? If you're just giving me AI output, why can't I do that? So I think there's a little bit of a hesitancy to say we're adopting AI and we're adopting it in a meaningful way, because they don't want to alienate those clients.
Yeah.
And that's really the sticking point, I think, until there's an excuse to adopt AI in a significant, meaningful, call it banner waving type way. You're simply not going to hear about mass wave adoption by businesses that are either replacing their employees, because it's going to make other employees rather nervous, and it's going to potentially cause their client base to say, well, why am I paying you if all you're doing is giving me an AI output?
Well, that's very interesting. I mean, makes a lot of sense. And so, and again, that's kind of where you are right now, like you said, in the early phases. But let's say we fast forward 2-3 years, again, back to what you said. Now we've got companies that have adopted this, right? And adopted to whatever that's going to be. We just don't know just yet. And then we get to a cycle where, again, we do start to see some displacement, right? Many think we could see that. Don't you think we're going to start seeing now the discussion of social safety nets, or those things are going to be coming up, or you think that probably gets too far into the politics of things?
We didn't see it with the internet.
True.
The internet was supposed to be, job destroying. It was supposed to be, horrible. You did see a significant change in the way that retail, operated, right? All of a sudden you had Amazon to compete with. But the retailers that went out and actually had websites and, actually adopted the internet as part of their retail strategy survived and even thrived. I mean, not necessarily to the extent that Amazon thrived, but they thrived. So I would say it's not so much about the displacement. It's about where do those workers go? The ATM was supposed to destroy the bank teller positions, and bank tellers, guess what? They're still there.
They are.
So I think there's more hype around what AI is going to do to the American worker than I think there should be, and less hype about what AI can help the American worker do than there should be. It's very much I would say a tale of how is this going to evolve the U.S. labor market instead of how is it going to ruin it. And it's probably...
That's refreshing to hear, by the way. You're not hearing that. That is very refreshing, though.
Yeah. I mean, we have a shortage of plumbers and electricians, et cetera. It's going to potentially make plumbers and electricians far more, call it productive, just on their schedule. So if you have 50% better scheduling and 50% better, car and truck time, all of a sudden you've reduced the need to, really ramp up your plumber and electrician licensing by 50%. And given we're probably 50% short on both of those, that's a pretty big positive for the U.S. economy and a very big positive for them. So overall, I would say it's really going to be a very powerful tool, but it's not going to be one that completely destroys the labor market.
Well, that's good to hear. So now talking about maybe geopolitical and thinking, isn't the United States we're kind of the open AI, that's where it started, right? Are U.S. companies, U.S. workers, does this make us more competitive, more productive? How do you see that on a geopolitical aspect?
You probably want to be a friend of the U.S. if you want to have access to the best AI tools. Right? It's an interesting concept from the kind of all the way back to the internet, right? The internet was largely a U.S. construct, and it all kind of ran through the U.S., and that was part of the reason why Edward Snowden was, in trouble. So it becomes really intriguing when you think about the race for AI is really the race to have the next big tech tool, and really, really powerful ability to say, hey, you're a friend of the U.S. or you're an ally of the U.S., you can have access to this technology. You're not an ally of the U.S., maybe you can't. That is going to be one of the more powerful technological tools. This whole CHIPS Act and restricting what chips can and can't be sold to China is probably a story that is very 2022 in the age of AI.
So this kind of reshapes that geopolitical landscape then.
Massively.
Wow. Well, let me ask you on this, because now this is the kind of the interesting part. You're hearing about, certain companies coming out there testifying on AI. Many of the politicians are scared. I get a little bit of nightmares thinking about Mark Zuckerberg trying to explain to politicians on how, Twitter made money in terms of advertisement. And now, the scary part is I feel like a lot of leaders of the world or leaders of companies, and of course, leaders of in politics have to come together to try to put some sort of framework or rules-based system around this to some degree. And just hearing those, simple things in terms of Twitter and trying to even imagining the collaboration that needs to happen actually happening. What are your thoughts on just kind of the rules-based and the politics around this?
I mean, we barely have a structure for social media, and that's been around for 15 years, 16 years. If you include MySpace, almost 2 decades. I
remember that now.
If you include MySpace. I think I still have a MySpace account.
I know. I think it's still up. I'm not sure.
I hadn't thought about that. Might have to delete that now.
Yeah.
But we barely have a construct for how to regulate that. So I would say the threat of regulating AI is it's a little overrated. I mean, the chances of the U.S. government actually figuring out how to do that and then passing it is de minimis, particularly when you have the type of lobbying power that big tech has. I mean, if you can't regulate effectively Facebook and Twitter and Google already, you're probably not going to be able to regulate Microsoft.
Yeah.
Google, Facebook, Amazon, all of them, all at the same time when it comes to AI. So I think it's much more of a headline driver than anything else.
Well, I can tell you,
it's just going to be the Wild West.
Well, so far, I mean, you're very calming in regards. I mean, in conversations I'm having, a lot of people are, again, they're nervous. Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to be outdated? I mean, so many, like you said, headline grabbers. But are there any things? What scares you about it? What are some things that maybe does it get out of control, or is that even possible?
What scares me about it is that AI models are they're trained on large language models, LLMs, and garbage in equals garbage out, right? And, like my mom always told me.
So, mom.
My mom. But I think it's interesting because that's really what scares me, is that when you begin to rely on AI to a significant degree to do a lot of these productivity enhancing tasks, you're trusting it quite a bit that what it's spitting out is truthful, right? And, you don't want to have to double check an AI, right? That's not the point of having AI. That's not productivity enhancing. That's, that's taking up more and more time. So you're trusting it to be telling you at least somewhat the truth. That to me is really where the scary part comes out, is that you end up having a significant amount of non-truths coming out of the system that
people believe that it's truth,
and people believe that it's truth, right? It's don't believe everything you read online. I mean, right? And guess what? They're trained on.
Well, people are using the right letters, and then they just send it and don't even bother knowing if it's accurate or not.
Well, and
right?
AI is trained off the internet.
Yeah.
So, don't believe everything you read online. Your AI is trained.
Just search all the data available and aggregate it, basically.
So that's really the thing that keeps me up at night. It's not that it's going to destroy jobs. It's not that there's going to be some cataclysmic event in the global economy because of it. It's mostly that what we're going to find is that AI ends up teaching us a whole lot of stuff that simply isn't true.
Wow. Well, I mean, I can definitely see how that's the case. I mean, I've dabbled with it to, see some degree. It's been very useful in some areas, but then, like you said, it has its limitations. And back to the trust. I mean, I'm just now trusting, ordering clothes on online. I mean, where before I had to go in the store. It's taken many years for that to happen. And so kind of, again, it's going to take a while. I mean, trust for, at least for humans to trust, that takes time to build. So it sounds like that's kind of what you're thinking. I mean, as we'll adapt it, we'll utilize it, it'll enhance and probably increase productivity, but it's not going to be this huge transformation within a short period of that 2 to 3 year span. But this is kind of where I guess the scary part gets, and you hear, and this is where we're getting a little bit of sci-fi, and you hear quantum computing kind of gets involved in this, which makes things faster. And you look, I know it's crazy to think of, but people start thinking Skynet, remember the Terminator, all that stuff. I mean, is there any point that you have where you think that, that gets integrated, we see something like that? I know it's hard to tell, no one really knows, but is that a concern of yours, or how does it go off rails, basically?
Oh, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a concern of mine now.
Yeah.
Quantum computing is not exactly right around the corner in a meaningful way.
Okay.
At least in an affordable way. And by that I mean like the next 6 months. Who knows?
Thanks.
I mean, nobody thought that GPT-4 was going to, it'd be 3 months after GPT-3. So, who knows how quickly it will, but you have to be able to manufacture it, et cetera, et cetera. So it's probably just going to be a couple of people that have the quantum computing power at first. And, I'm just going to guess, the US government and Amazon. Amazon's a joke, but it's probably just going to be the U.S. government that has that ability at first. And does that give me kind of Skynet vibes? No.
Okay.
Should it terrify China and Russia? Yeah.
Okay.
So it's much more of a geopolitical tool for major powers when it comes to the quantum computing front than anything, at least for the first few years. That's really the key, is that they're going to be the only ones that can really afford it. They're going to be the only ones that have the ability to utilize it. And, it took a long time for the affordability to really trickle down for computing power. Quantum computing power is going to be very expensive. Maybe it becomes less expensive on a more rapid basis, but it's going to be incredibly expensive to do. So it's going to be the theater of governments to begin with, and that's really where I would say it doesn't necessarily become terrifying. It becomes a very, very powerful tool of coercion.
So why do you hear people like Elon Musk? What do they mean by, can we try and slow it down? Why did they say that? What does that mean? How do you slow it down?
I have no idea how you slow it down.
Okay.
And I would say that the only reason that Elon Musk is saying we need to slow it down is because he doesn't have a significant stake in AI.
So it's more of a selfish.
I mean, he's doing FSD like it's going out of style. That's his, his self-driving, and that's not exactly something that hasn't killed anyone. AI, at least not yet, hasn't killed anyone. So I think there's a little bit of a. Okay, Elon.
Well, I mean, it sounds like, again, the good news is everybody relax. However, I would say if anybody that's continuing to work, anybody that's in school, probably something, hey, you know what, we need to learn and enhance and be there with it. I wouldn't get behind it. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Oh, do not get behind it.
Okay.
You really want to understand how to use it. It's like understanding how to use the internet if you were coming out of school in the early 2000s.
So learning to use the internet, or you're going to fight against it and use a typewriter, you're not going to have a job, right?
Or the computer in the 90s, right?
Gotcha.
These were relatively new technologies that if you understood and knew, you could really enhance your job prospects.
Well, Sam, this has been incredibly inspiring and refreshing for one. I think everybody can hopefully pause and relax, but thanks for joining me and thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.